friends. Welcome to the second session of day 2. I'm glad that you guys made it down from lunch, and I'm sure a couple other people will be joining us as they find their way. I am happy to introduce Cristina Starr. She is a traditionally in astrophysics or just standard physics? Lots of kinds of physics. And has gone from studying physics and aeronautics to now becoming an environmentalist, as well as practicing a lot of holistic approaches to how people interact with each other. She is going to do a much better job of introducing herself and her work, so please give it up for Cristina.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Cristina Starr. I'll introduce myself a little bit further in here. I want to address the topic of this conference, which is analog missions, for the benefit of Earth, right? We talk a lot about making space for Earth and ensuring that, the work that we do is something that is actually going to benefit the Earth. And as we're in this time of great change on many fronts, it behooves us to really take a deeper look at the impacts of the approach that we're taking in the space industry and find the ways and exact pathways through which we can make a positive impact. So part of this today, I'm going to introduce a project that I've been working on in partnership and some of the takeaways from that. And then we're also going to have an open discussion here. That's why I was asking earlier, who's actually in analogs. I want to hear from you guys. This is part of an open discussion. Discussion about what? Well, the race to the moon is on. And we've got the International Lunar Research Station with China and Russia taking the lead, and the Artemis program and commercial interests, and there's this sense of we're going to the moon and we're going to stay. However, at the same time, we're having global crises, right? Polycrises, environmental crises, humanitarian crises, and there is a strong critique from environmentalists, right? Earthbound environmentalists are saying, how can you spend the resources and the polluting industry to continue to try to escape the Earth, right? We've heard these critiques, and but then folks who work in space are like, no, we're not trying to leave the Earth, we're doing this for the Earth, and it's so good for us. So I'm working to reconcile this, and I'm working with the Moon Village Association, who recently created the Global Expert Group on Sustainable Lunar Activities, GIGSLA. They're working directly with the United Nations to try to come up with recommendations because we're in this entirely unregulated space, essentially. There is no governance structure. There is no real international policy or agreed upon norms for how to proceed with lunar activities, and yet here they're right around the corner. We're plowing headlong into them. So the project is called Making Space for the Environment, and this is a project of the Human Space Program, which I volunteer for. That's President Frank White. And the first we did as a part of this Making Space for the Environment, which has the goal of trying to unite and bring the conversation between Earth and space environmentalists and really listen to each other and find common ground and unearth what needs to be understood to proceed in a way that really is a benefit. So this is the project, and in order to do that, the first thing that we decided to do is organize a couple of expert panel discussions, of which we have a few members who are at this conference and one who is in this room right now. So I went to find a diverse group of voices that could begin this conversation and begin begin to illuminate what the factors are that we really need to consider. And as mentioned, so this is the Moon Village Association Human Space Program, and then my company is Cosmic Citizen Trainings, and so I'm able to produce and sponsor this. So this is, but down to it, it's just the three of us, really. It's like these three folks. As mentioned, yeah, I'm a lifelong environmentalist. I grew up off-grid, very close to the indigenous peoples, the Nisinan and the Maidu, and also then in the Lakota tradition. And so there's a way in which keeping the earth as a part of the conversation continually is close to my heart. And I also have been studying climate change as a scientist since I started studying science in college. And I'm truly concerned about the state of things. What we have right now is this acceleration, and we have someone here who just lost their entire town to a record-breaking tornado 3 days ago. Just took out an entire town that was a mile wide. These types of events happening more and more frequently, record-breaking this, record-breaking that, thresholds that we're dangerously close to. And it's very uncomfortable, right? But if we are to be responsible stewards, then we need to understand that this is a part of the landscape that we are operating in, right? This is the life that we have to navigate. So these panels, we wanted to cover a couple basic grounds. What even is the environment? This question has a lot of policy implications as far as legally defining the environment. The terms space and environment, space environment, aren't actually defined internationally in law. And, I forgot to mention, just finishing my master's in space policy. So that's part of the lens that I look through here is from a policy perspective. So we really wanted to see, like, what is the moon and what is the earth, right? Can we even conceptualize these things as two separate entities, or are they a part of the same system? So we have here, on this panel is Alvin Harvey, who's here in this room. And he's finishing up he just defended his dissertation, right, in aeronautics and astronautics at MIT, specifically indigenous research methodologies in those fields. Alice Gorman is a space archaeologist. She knows everything about what is up there and the impact that we have had and the legacy that we're leaving. Jean-Claude Werns, executive director of COSPAR, and he is spent his career like managing large-scale science management projects, right? And Dr. Margaret Ellis is an astrophysicist, Harvard and Smithsonian. He's really interested in industry and on the moon and what it would take to actually have like on the dark side of the moon. Very excited about that. Second panel we talked about was really trying to dig our teeth into, can lunar exploration help mitigate the climate crisis, right? This is the question that's at the core, but if we didn't identify what the Earth and the Moon are, how do we know what we're doing? So we first kind of tried to lay down the definitions, and then we dug a little bit deeper into some of the actual, like, the harm that the space industry is doing, and then also the benefits, right? Let's look at the pros and the cons, the timelines that they're on, the systems that create those, and see how we can change them. So the second panel, we have astrophysics professor. Everyone on here is very multidisciplinary because this is a multidisciplinary topic, right? So Dr. Claire Nelson is also here at this conference. We've got experts in policy and law, indigenous law and rights, and also the overview effect, right? This is something that's near and dear to Frank's heart, of course, and Selva is finishing up her dissertation on like how VR of overview effect can potentially lead to more sustainable actions. So we laid this out with, here's the timeline that we're working in space plans. You're probably aware of this, but we've got essentially within the next 15 years, a lot of different efforts to make a permanent presence on the moon. So this is the time scale that we're trying to hone in on, like the amount of time that we have plans for. Why are we doing it? Well, you guys have a lot of the big whys already. Science is a huge part of the drive. But of course there's also a lot of geopolitical power. This is what kind of funds all of that science in the drive. If it weren't for the demonstrations of technology and the potential for having kind of military high ground, there's an element of another Cold War happening with China, Russia, the United States, and allies as far as getting their presence on the south pole of the moon, right? I just wanted to cover, so the other thing is there's this idea that helium-3 is very rich on the moon, and that can potentially be used for technology revolutions such as nuclear fusion, but not like first generation fusion, but technologies that don't exist yet. But theoretically, that would be what you'd want. Helium-3 is rare on Earth, more abundant on the moon. And quantum computing is also something that can be used for now. You guys understand that there is this kind of less quantifiable value to space, that, there's what is his name? Michael Griffin, who was a NASA administrator. He gave a speech on the real reasons why we go to space versus the acceptable reasons, right? And the real reasons are these inspirational reasons, this drive, the human destiny, the sense of unity that we can create. I think that we all feel that in our hearts. It's part of what drives us. It's what inspired us since we were children. And then there's these quantifiable things that we try to, the acceptable reasons that you can quantify, which are kind of the other things, the science, the technology. So that outlined what the project was, what the panels were, and I want to go real quick through some of these takeaways. And then I will relate back to some takeaways for analog specifically, and then we're going to talk about this. So as I go through these, I want you to be thinking about applications to the work that you do, right? This is work that I'm doing so that you have something tangible to actually implement in whatever you're doing. One, the moon and the earth are not separate. It is an earth-moon system. You cannot define the earth and the biosphere without the moon. There is no actual really clear separation, just like with the atmosphere, right? We've got this kind of logarithmic stratigraphy that moves in out from the surface of the earth through cislunar space, and then we end up with like the surface of the moon. And if you try to separate those things, like we can conceptually separate them, but scientifically, it actually, you can't define what the Earth is without the moon. The days are 24 hours because of the moon. The seasons exist because of the Mars-sized object that we believe hit the Earth and created the moon, knocked the Earth off its axis, and then also the orbit of the moon maintains that stably, right? So we have that stable 23.5 degree inclination, which creates their seasons. With that, I could spend a whole lecture just talking about how the moon and life and the biosphere are intimately related. They're like inseparable. inseparable. So when we think about going to the moon, we need to think about how we may disturb that and what that may in turn do to the biosphere. And the big takeaway with that is that we can harm the Earth and the moon. We can do irreparable damage, just like we're witnessing ourselves doing here. The Earth has these thresholds that we can exceed, and we're seeing that right now as we're getting dangerously close to them. There's this kind of frontierism that has driven a lot of the direction of our culture. That is that the world is too big for us to really affect. We just do what we do. Oh no, well the ocean's too big for us to really affect. Oh, the atmosphere is too big. Oh, orbital space is too big. The moon now is within that. It's in cislunar space. The solar system. We need to understand that what we do really does have an impact. We can harm it. But there's also always a sense of responsibility and a positive when we have influence. It means that we can also potentially have a regenerative influence, right? If we acknowledge first and foremost that what we do matters and it has an impact, and that impact is potentially bigger than we'd like to think, then we can start to be a little more careful. Yeah, so just real quick, the thing here with the launches, the soot deposition in the upper atmosphere has been shown to punch holes in the ozone layer. And this is specifically a reaction with the alumina. And right now we are approaching the same amount of soot deposition in the upper atmosphere with launches as we have with all of general aviation. And when we're thinking about being really excited about lowering the cost of launch and making space more accessible and having Starship flying every day, what we're talking about is doing something to the atmosphere that we have no idea what it's going to do. We don't know the effects of this. We do know that it punches holes in the atmosphere or in the ozone layer, but we don't know much more beyond that. There are so many unknowns. So one of the main takeaways was this strong need for governance, because there is no environmental policy. I over this a little bit. There's also, when we have this idea of governance in the international sphere, you have to wonder, how do you enforce that, right? Because we are living in a nationalistic world still. So the UN is a body that has come up with ways to make treaties and make agreements, and within that there are some enforcement mechanisms. So those have to be considered how to enforce any system of governance that gets created. There is no organization that's really taking lead on environmental policy for the moon right now, and we're hoping to get that going as soon as possible. How will the resources on the moon be shared? Right, this is a part of the Outer Space Treaty that what we do in space is for the benefit of all humanity. This is something that all the nations that are spacefaring have agreed to. What does that mean? How do we share any resources that may or may not be extracted from the moon? And also, if space is for all humanity, the moon is the heritage of all of humanity and the Earth and all of the beings that live on the Earth. How do we make sure that we're including people in that conversation? How do we include as many voices as we can to ensure that we are utilizing the potential? What the best thing about space is its potential to unify us and to have these conversations. And so inclusion is one of the biggest takeaways that we have. It's very important to bring as many people, as many different voices, including those that are going to challenge us and our belief structure and our ideas of what we love and why we should do what we do. If we're open to being challenged, and listening to other points of view, then there's a potential there for incredible cooperation, right? So that starts with each one of us, and you can imagine in your own personal life if somebody comes up and challenges your political belief or, your diet, your dietary choices. Are you staunchly holding fastly to your point of view, or are you open to listening to that other person's experience? Doing this on a large scale, when we're talking about organizing to move to the moon, it's very ambitious, but it's extremely important, and it always comes down to, though, in individual interactions. Even at the UN, it's like there's as many people as we are here, we're talking to each other, we're listening. Can we really listen? And Dr. Alice Gorman, she made this really interesting point that because technology exists today, we can actually take a survey of everybody and be like, what do you guys want to do on the moon? That as a project, it's possible to initiate something where every nation and every tribal nation then has the capacity to survey its own people and come to the table with something. Let's put our finger on the pulse. Let's get it. Something. The old model of having individuals represent a whole people, and politically, is something that might be becoming less relevant now that we have this much more connected world. So a huge point here is that there are ecological and sustainability experts from many different cultures that didn't necessarily go to university, but they are lineage holders of incredible bodies of knowledge about how to live in right relationship and in harmony with the ecosystem, right? And these indigenous knowledge systems, there are people who we can consult them, we can ask them, right? We can listen. It exists, that we don't have to invent it necessarily. There's this capacity to tap the wisdom traditions of the entire world that have so much impact on how we view the way that we are proceeding and the way that we interact with each other, and the way that we run our businesses and the way that we choose our projects and our governments. All of that is something that we're not alone in it as Westerners with one single culture, right? And with that, there's a nationalistic ethos that can create barriers. So our space program is the American space program. That is turn off because we just added a whole political story to it. So the capacity for people politics, as Dr. Claire Nelson calls it, which is us. This is us making connections. There are people here from all over the world. We are having conversations, we are making connections. We get to do that despite whatever our nations are doing. So a couple other key takeaways is there's this opportunity to learn a lot, right? But we also need to understand what needs to be preserved because, all right, we want to mine water on the moon in order to use for our lunar bases. That water has a memory of 4 billion years. It has lived in permanently shadowed places for over 4 billion years, and that has a value that can't be quantified. So do we just take that and melt it and filter it and drink it? Or, right? Is that do we use that in our toilet systems to clean, or do we do something else with that water? Can we respect that water? Can we learn from that water? The last point here is about the importance of decoupling military from space. It really is a space and military industry, and if if we were to reframe dual use as, oh, we're making this for space and we're making it for sustainability for Earth, instead of we're making this for space and we're making it for rockets, for international, or for ICBMs, right, for missiles. Okay. So we're switching gears here a little bit. A lot of times we see that quote, that the part that's in white, right? We came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is we discovered the Earth. But you don't usually see that first part. It didn't take long for the moon to become boring, dirty beach sand. And then we suddenly saw this object. We're coming around the Earth, right? And it was the only color in the universe, right? And then that's when we stopped this photo, and this was the birth of the environmental movement, right? To a certain, that's what it's attributed to. So the overview effect potentially can play a role here. We're talking about indirect effects, positive. If we shift our perspective, if you have more people who are going up there, if you have the overview effect that's not just from orbit, but also from the moon, or even from the dark side of the moon, seeing the vacuum of empty space, how may that galvanize us to act differently? Because this is the thing, is like, with the overview effect, we all know that shit's going down here on Earth right now, right? We are aware of it. We don't need more photos or astronauts to tell us that this is something that's important. What we do need, though, is to feel it, right? Is to act on it. So the question really is, well, is sending more people up there going to create more action? So as far as the pros are concerned, what we have is the potential for cleaner energy technologies such as fusion and also space-based solar. However, these are way down the line. This is not in that 15-year time span that we're talking about. And possibly, though, the most beneficial takeaway is that if we work together to get to the moon, then we're enhancing communication, coordination, and cooperation, just like we have on the ISS. So when Ukraine happens, there's all sorts of tension that shows up nationalistically, but those cosmonauts and astronauts are still on the ISS working together. They're coming down and landing in each other's territories. They're getting along just fine. That matters. It makes a big difference. And also the communication, coordination, cooperation, if we expand the number of voices and stakeholders and include in that many more peoples of Earth, then we can potentially find more indigenous ecological knowledge systems that can support climate action. So that's the political side of things, right? All right, how many I'm over?
Just a little bit, but we did start a little bit late, so you have like 2-3 minutes.
Oh boy. Well, we didn't get to the discussion part that I wanted to. I can just talk so much about this. Implications for analogs. I just want to say, so we're talking about norm setting. You guys are setting norms. You are, you have a role in establishing the narrative that we tell about going to space. And I just want to, impress upon you that we each do have an ethical responsibility. It matters what you do and how you proceed with your missions. And so if you include more stakeholders in your analogs, if you consult with the indigenous wisdom keepers, experts on your analogs, and then that's a way that you can start to expand the number of possibilities and cooperation. It's like working on the same thing at this scale. And for mission planning, if you one of the main takeaways is that the technology is not going to help save us. The technology we create from space, that's not going to save us. However, if we think about Earth applications and sustainability applications on every stage of our process of mission planning, engineering, then we are truly creating something dual use, right? But it's not going to happen unless we try. That's the main point. It's not going to happen unless we put deliberate effort and we make sustainability just as important as financial sustainability, right? So if you pay as much attention to that in your business model and your mission planning and say this is elevated to the point where if it's not environmentally stable, then it's not feasible. Let's go back to the drawing board, do this again. Creating the pathways for cooperation, coordination, and communication, that's systems of relationship. And that matters also. The way that you find to include people, listen, and to find ways to cooperate and communicate, and that sets a precedent that helps go back to creating norms and that can potentially scale. Okay, so this is where we're gonna have a discussion, right? And I know that we're scrunched for time, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have a breakout, not necessarily immediately after this, right? Because we wanna, if you guys wanna stay for the second one, but after this last one, this next talk, I'm gonna stay in this room and we can have a conversation. And if at any point in time you wanna come up to me after this, throughout the conference, and talk to me about what you think, you know, I wanna hear from you about how you think this applies to analogs. Because the point of this is I'm working on this, I'm continuing this project, and some of the takeaways from this are going into a report that is going to be reported to the COPOS UN meeting on June 18th in Vienna. So this is not just like, this is my fun project. People who are decision makers are going to hear these recommendations, and so if you have an idea, even an inkling